thank you and welcome. Actually, give each and every one of yourself that round of applause should be each and every one of you who is here, who cares enough about this issue to be here on a early summer night, so that way we can have this conversation and also talk about the actions that we can take. Before I get more into the substance of the issue, I do briefly want to thank folks, because putting together a town hall like this takes an enormous amount of work and coordination. So it was important for me to co-host this event with the right group, Penn Environment, and you personally, Adam, thank you very much for what you did. I also want to thank Sierra Club, the Pennsylvania chapter, the Climate Reality Project, Penn Future, Moms Clean Air Force, and I also just want to recognize a few folks on my staff who worked very hard in this. Scott Heppard in the back. He's the only person with a tie besides me, so you're going to recognize him. Also, my legislative director, Helena Mastrogiannis, who came up from Washington, D.C. At the end of the night, you'll be quizzed on the proper pronunciation of Mastrogiannis, so extra credit to anyone who gets that right. I've only been in office for 6 months, so I have not had the opportunity to speak too much on the House floor. But one of the issues that I strongly took to the House floor to combat was specifically on climate change. And I mentioned in that House speech, and it actually got gasps from one or two people, which shows, I think, in some ways the extent of the problem. I said that climate change is real. This is a real problem. I would be so happy to be wrong about this. Unfortunately, I don't believe that 97% of the scientists who have studied this issue are wrong. Unfortunately, just in my own lifetime, and as some people remarked, my lifetime might be a little bit shorter than some other lifetimes of other members of Congress. I'm 38. But just in my lifetime, the 10 warmest years in recorded history have all taken place. And in fact, even if I weren't 38, if I were 18, I would be able to make that same exact statement. I also pointed out on the House floor, and have continued to do so, and will continue to do so, that this is not just, quote-unquote, an environmental issue. Sometimes some people put the environment over here, and yes, I care about the environment, but I also really care about the economy. I also really care about national security. I also really care about health care. One of the important things that I really want to hammer home, not just tonight, but in my advocacy on this issue, is that climate change is, yes, an environmental issue, but it is also a health issue, which we'll hear a little bit more about tonight. It is a national security issue, and yes, it is an economic issue. Let me briefly, well, we're going to hear about health and we're going to hear about environmental. So let me actually take the economic and national security parts of that. First, on the economic, this false dichotomy has been created that we can either do things to help the economy, or we can focus on this environmental issue, which has a big cost to it and will hurt the economy. That is the false construct that has been proposed and put out there. That is wrong. First, as we've seen, there are tremendous costs to inaction. 2012 was the most expensive year for insurance and reinsurance in our nation's history, as a direct result of the numerous calamitous events that took place that were partly affected by climate change, at least partly affected. The consequences of failing to act will continue to rise. And let me bring this not locally to those of us who live in Montgomery County or Philadelphia, but locally to the United States. If you were in South Florida and you are in famous Miami Beach, which relies a great deal of their economy on tourism, there are now whole sections and streets that flood at midday. Aren't even high tide, not even a cloud in the sky, and are not passable because of flooding. Virginia Beach, Virginia, the same thing is happening, as well as many other coastal parts of Maryland. And again, these are areas that rely a great deal on tourism dollars and have very expensive real estate in those areas. As the temperature continues to rise an average of at least 3 degrees, possibly as high as 7 degrees for the rest of the century, those effects will only continue to happen. We are also seeing an increase in the number of extreme events. So not only are the extremes greater, but the number of extreme events are increasing in frequency, which of course means a higher cost of cleanup and a higher cost of insurance payouts and reinsurance. On the national security part, because I think that a great deal of climate change skeptics will scoff at this notion that this is somehow a national security issue. I offer 2 pieces of evidence to support this. First and foremost, don't take it from me as a member of Congress. Take it from our last Secretary of Defense, who talked about climate change as having a dramatic impact on our national security. Second, not just looking to the future, but looking to the past, we have seen that countries have often gone to war together toward one another when they've been in a fight over precious resources. So it just follows that with climate change being real, there are and will be global security impacts that as a result flow from the climate change. Now, there are many other things that I want to go into, and I know that I only have an allotted few minutes. So let me just transition briefly to the very pragmatic points of where we are in Washington, D.C. in this issue. And right now, it's a mixed bag. I wish I could stand here and say that I feel optimistic about the way things are going, but that would not be the case. Nor, by the way, do I feel incredibly pessimistic. As I mentioned, it's mixed. First and foremost, we've had an administration the last 6.5 years that has made real strides and is continuing to do so. And I'm very encouraged not just by what has come out, but what I know is also in the works that the next 2 years we're going to see some very meaningful administrative and policy statements and proposals in combating climate change. However, the part that I am most pessimistic about and most frustrated with is the legislative branch, the branch in which I serve. I can't tell you how many amendments so far, and there's a list of all of my votes for the first 6 months I've been in office and as long as I will stay there. So please go out and go on the internet and look at these for yourselves. There have been so many amendments attached to pieces of legislation that have not been about how we can attack climate change, that haven't been about innovative proposals that we can use taxes and tax credits to spur innovative growth and help us combat climate change and help us adopt economically sound policies that would encourage the private sector to move in this direction. Instead, most of the amendments have been the exact opposite, where we've been playing defense, where I have had to stand up and actually begin a speech by saying, yes, climate change is real. Don't look at me like I have 3 heads. That is the game in which we are now. So as part of attempting to affect change, because ultimately most legislators listen to their voters and to the people far more than the skeptics realize, creating a ground-up movement to pay attention to these issues, and I know I'm preaching to the choir when it comes to this, but reaching into our different communities and trying to show why this matters, why this is an incredibly important issue right here in Jenkintown, Cheltenham, and Abington, which has had tremendous flooding issues over the last 15 years and will continue to have those issues, particularly as climate change, the problem of climate change is exacerbated. So one of the reasons, more than anything, why I wanted to do this town hall, and I was so excited to team up with Penn Environment on this, is I hope we will see a replication of this throughout other communities in not just suburban Philadelphia, but actually nationwide, to make people understand the severity of this issue right now. We cannot talk about 50 years from now or 100 years from now. This is right now. Finally, I will conclude with this. I'm the father of, she turns exactly 18 months on Thursday. I hope to God that, since we're in a church, I guess that is appropriate. I hope to God, and appealing to the reason of man, that when my daughter is a senior, not a senior in college, but a senior citizen, she's not enjoying or having to suffer from a radically different climate and shaking her head saying, my God, what were those people in the early part of the 21st century thinking when they failed to act on these issues, even though so much evidence was right in front of their face? Thank you.